Sukihotu and a warm welcome to the Buddhist Mahavira's Facebook page. We are going live this evening on our BMW's Dhammadana series. We've actually taken a long break. Actually, we've taken almost 5 weeks, 5.5 weeks away from the online broadcast because in the month of May, we actually opened the Buddhist Mahavira to the devotees and the public, and we're actually now conducting live and in-person talks here at the Buddhist Mahavihara. But when we did that, there were a lot of queries and inquiries from our devotees who are not very happy because they can't listen to the Dhamma talks. And they say, what happened to your live broadcast online? So we've decided to do a mix between in-person as well as online Dhamma sharings here for the month of June. And for the first Dhamma talk in the month of June, we have with us a very distinguished speaker. He has been with us on our Dhammadana series here, the Buddhist Mahavira's Facebook page live. He's Dr. Gamini Abhaya. Let me introduce Doctor to the studio. Good evening, Doctor,
Good evening.
and welcome again to Dhammadana series. It's been a long time. We were supposed to do a broadcast in April, and we had to cancel because you were going abroad, I think to Sri Lanka, right? And then we had to postpone it. And here we are again this evening to carry on where we left off. For those of you who are not very familiar, let me quickly read Dr. Gamini's profile. Dr. Gamini was born in Sri Lanka and had his education in Ananda College, which is a premier Buddhist school. He excelled in studies and sports and then entered the Colombo Medical College. He then went to England to specialize in medicine, and in the UK, he passed the specialist exams and worked as a consultant physician there. Now, he has dedicated his life to conducting talks and discussions on Buddha Dhamma, where he espouses the original Buddha doctrine. With that, let me now invite Dr. Gamini to start this evening's Dhamma sharing entitled How to See Buddha, Part 4. Doctor?
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me again to your Dhamma discussions. First of all, I have to say I'm sorry. Last time I couldn't make it due to unavoidable circumstances. But today, however, we will conduct our usual session, and I hope to just uh, go through what we have said in brief in the past discussions, and so that you will be able to follow the rest of the discussion easily. Now, the first of the things that I would like to mention to the audience is that what we are talking today, and our discussion series has been based on seeing Buddha. Now, seeing Buddha is not seeing a person. Buddha is a state within you, and that is intelligence. And every one of us have the highest level of intelligence within us. But only thing we have to do is to unearth it. It's been hidden or covered or masked by various other systems that operate in our bodies, which has completely submerged the ability for a person to start with to uncover this intelligence. I said to start with because when you start with the mind, and the mind system is the one that's operating at present now in us. In a short time, I will try to explain how this mind system works and how it prevents the actual intelligence that lies within us, that is based within our bodies, how it prevents the emerging of that highest state of intelligence. And a message of a Tathagata, a person once who discovered this and explained to the people, now called Buddha, unfortunately, but it should be a different name to differentiate Buddha as a state of knowledge within. Unfortunately, in the religion called Buddhism, it's referred to as a person called Buddha. But we should call him the Tathagata, which has a different meaning, which means Tatha means reality, Gata means that you move away from reality, so that to become intelligent or to become or to attain the Buddhahood, that means attain the level of intelligence, also called full enlightenment, and to achieve that state, you need to move away from reality, and that's why he was known as Tathagata. But unfortunately, nowadays we call him Buddha, and that has confused many people as seeing Buddha as they are expecting to see a person. And it is well known in the books as well to a person called Vakali. He had said that you can't look at me and see Buddha. You have to look at within yourself to unearth that state which is already lying within you. So today's discussion is based on seeing Buddha. So to see Buddha, we have to uncover that state, which is because it's hidden behind various other systems. And this, of course, is not a religion. I will come to that later. It is a state where something lies within you that you uncover. Everybody, each and everybody, irrespective their sex, color, creed, and religion, can uncover the truth that lies within you. It is only the path to uncover that truth you have to learn. And once you learn that path, you can travel on that path to the state of Buddha, that means state of intelligence. And most people have got confused with the a system of living system of um, social and cultural um, system of designated ways of living with this state of intelligence. That's because a thing called religion has come up. It is now called Buddhism, um, and that has confused most of us and has included various parameters from other religions to completely actually confuse and direct people on the wrong path. When Darshana means seeing Buddha, became converted into a religion, then the, the so-called fully enlightened ones um, cease to attain, cease to exist. The After the death of Tathagata, for about 450 years, it's recorded in history, there were fully enlightened ones, and after that, when it became a religion, no such fully enlightened ones emerged for the last 2100 years or so. So the reason was people got confused with the religion, and I will briefly summarize the differences between the religion and seeing. Now, remember, this seeing is not a philosophy. It's not based on science. It is something that emerges from inside, and that is already there. It's been covered with various other systems, as I said at the beginning. Now, this religion nowadays um, has various types of definitions, but the common ones used are in the Western section, it's uh, belief in and worship of supernatural structures, elements, person, or called God or gods, and also called divine, and any such system of belief and worship are called religions in the Western world. But it's slightly different to the Eastern world, where it's considered a social cultural system of designated behaviors, and less emphasis has been placed on supernatural beings, although they are being included from various other religions in Buddhism. But they are mostly considered with behaviors, practices, morals, and beliefs. And of course, in both there is worship. So at the end of the day, all religions have belief, faith, and worship. So they to do that, they have a person called me that exists. That is the belief, that is the reasoning through the mind that there is a person called me that lives, and that person should behave in such a way, conduct practices and morals, and believe in certain things. And one of those is called so-called spirit or soul. And remember, it's very clearly stated in the literature uh, that based on Buddhism as well, that soul is not what is described in Buddha message. It is called anatta. Soul in Sanskrit is called atma, and in Magadhi language which Tathagata spoke is called atta, and in English it's called I or me, in Latin ego, and also in English it's called self. So although you could see through your eyes and perceive through the mind that there is a person called you living at the moment, but when you look at how it's formed inside, at the end, as you go down, you divide and subdivide and go on dividing various parts of your body. At the end, you will come to a stage where there are tiny particles that arise and cease. And that is the state of Dhamma. Dha means the truth, Amma means the mother nature. So that's the truth of Mother Nature. And actually, the Mother Nature exists like that, that there are these tiny particles that arise and cease. And I call this particle because there's no other word to explain in English. It's so tiny that if you break that particle, there won't be anything left. No particles will be left. Now remember, modern science has gone down to electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on, and this is a lot further away from that. And it is not visible or perceived by the five senses or any equipment made through these five senses. So the scientists actually will never get to this stage of Dhamma. And beyond Dhamma, I said Dhamma is a stage where these small particles arise and cease. And if you find out what these particles consist of, they are actually conglomeration, aggregation of knowledge. Aggregation of knowledge is seen as a particle to the special eye called prajna. That eye also is hidden within our bodies and not allowed to emerge because of the activity of the mind. So beyond Dhamma, if you separate these aggregations of knowledge, then you get to pure knowledge, and that is where we call Nibbana. And that's where the arising and ceasing stops, and that means it's extinguished, arising and ceasing, and that position, that situation, or that state is called Nibbana, which is the purest knowledge. And it's not an empty place, and it's not a vacuum, it is a state with all the knowledge in the purest form. So if you get to that stage and you'll be able to see knowledge, normally you won't be able to see knowledge when the mind is active, because you use the knowledge to do various things in our lives, but you can't actually see knowledge. But when you get to that stage, you, prajna, will see the state of knowledge, and that is called nibbana. And Buddha is even beyond that situation. So those states are lying within us. But when it became a religion, they concentrated on this person called self and assumed or believed that it is a state that is, it is a person that is existing in this world, or we call loka, in the space of the world. And that person's space, that means our bodies, was considered internal, and then everything else in the space outside your body was called external. So there was a division between internal and external. And then this person interacts with the external environments, as you very well see when the activity of the mind is considered. Uh, you will live what you call a life by interacting with the outside world. And also, this world is made of the same thing as you, these so-called particles that arise and cease, which is called Dhamma. But when the mind is active, you do not come to that state or that level, but you will see as rupa, or images that are perceived, that are that arrives within your body through your five senses. And one of the things that is very obviously clear is that when the light falls on a object, say for example a tree, some of the colors of the light will be absorbed by the tree, and those colors that are not absorbed will reflect off the tree and fall on your eyes as an image. The tree actually has not come into your eyes, but it's only an image or a shadow of what is not the tree, because what is the tree is actually there, and all the light that fell on the tree were absorbed into that, except the ones that were reflected off. So what you perceive is the ones that are not absorbed by the tree. And it's the reason why you see the leaves as green, although the leaves of the tree uh, consist of all the other colors except green, because the green is not absorbed by the leaf. All the other colors are absorbed and is reflected off the leaf to your eyes, and you perceive it as green. So you get a wrong impression of that this, these leaves are green, but actually they are not. So you will see that all your sense organs, whether it's through eye or ear or nose or tongue or touch, you will perceive what is not outside. But however, we have learned to interact with that what is not outside. We think those objects are there, and we have learned to interact with the mind and and live what you call a life interacting with the outside environment. All these sense organs are focused to outside, but not focused to inside. If they were focused to inside, we would be able to inside read and know what's inside as well. Unfortunately, they are not. So what is inside we cannot see. What is outside we can see and hear and touch, but that is also what is not outside is the image that falls inside us and is analyzed by the mind and the memory. And we think we are, basically, we think that there is a person. We think There is an environment outside and environment inside, and we think the inside environment consists of self or me or I or ego. But actually it is not. So it is an illusion that you see through your mind. In the religion, however, this is considered as a fact, as truth, and you believe that there is a person called me. And then it tells you how to behave, how to practice morals, and consider having certain thoughts as beliefs, and this is the way it is. It's, the actual way it is, I said, is Dhamma, that arises and ceases. But through your senses, you see the way it is as something completely different. So you will see the main difference between the religion and seeing is religion to consider me as a person existing, whereas in the other, in seeing side, you will only know that there is no person and there is actually only arising and ceasing. And of course, beyond that is Nibbana. So the next thing is what makes us feel as if there is a person called me, and it is the system that brings all this information in from outside through our senses and then conduct through the nerves to the brain and to the mind, and then with the memory, which is part of the brain, not the mind, we analyze objects and we give them names and we remember them and we interact with them. And this system is active on the side of the religion, which is called the mind. But on the other side, that is on the side of seeing Buddha, you cannot see Buddha or state of Buddha or Dhamma through your own mind because it's not powerful enough, and also it produces only, it perceives only illusions. So for that you need to open a special eye, which is also found within your body, to see Dhamma and Buddha. So this eye is also hidden by the activity of the mind. So the religion assumes that this is the active thing and it is the greatest, the mind, there's nothing beyond that. And whereas in seeing Buddha, mind is the lowest level and there are various other levels that you go through, and Prajna is one of the levels that you can see Dhamma and Buddha. The third thing is that the five senses are active on the side of religion, whereas on the other side, it's the eye of Prajna that is active, not the five senses. And also, we think on the side of religion. There is always thoughts, thinking, whereas on the other side, we call Cheto Vimukti. Vimukti means release or relief or left behind. We leave behind the thoughts. We move away from the thoughts. We stop thoughts and move away into a different system. Um, and finally, we have people who do various practices, moral practices, worship practices, assuming that there's a person called me and there was a person called Buddha. And people believe and have been made to believe that if you worship Buddha, if you read and chant some of the verses or stanzas from what he is supposed to have said, it's written in the books, you will become enlightened. And that has not happened for 2100 years, and that will not happen because you always assimilate all that knowledge through the mind. Whereas we definitely know that the mind can't see the Dhamma and Buddha. And on the other side, on the seeing of Buddha, you have knowledge, knowing, which is not the knowledge that you get from outside through the mind. It is something completely different, and we ultimately end up at the final stage called intelligence or Buddha. And so seeing intelligence or seeing Buddha is the topic we are discussing today. So that really now we are getting right into that section of seeing Buddha, in that it is to move away from the religion to completely assimilate what is found within our bodies. So these are the five basic differences between religion and Buddha, and they are exactly opposite. So since the beginning of the religion, we have not been able to find Buddha within our bodies. And now, after 2100 years or so, now the system, the path to open up that eye of Prajna has now become available, and it's up to those who would like to become intelligent on a different scale. It's much more powerful than the common knowledge that you obtain from the five senses and assimilated by the mind and kept in memory, that you use for your day-to-day work. So these differences, you will realize, are very important, because none of the things that are found in religions, not just Buddhism, every other religion, uh, are found in on the other side of seeing Buddha. You have to leave everything behind, because everything that you assimilate in religions, acquire knowledge in religions, is through the mind. So a system that produces an illusion, whereas the seeing the truth, we call Dhamma the truth and Buddha the truth, in two stages, first the Dhamma, then Buddha. And both can be seen if you can open up that eye of Prajna, which lies within your bodies. So let's now look at the practices that you do, like alms giving, observing precepts, and meditation. And they are all, you do all engaging your mind. So therefore, they become illusions. As long as your mind is active, it produces only an illusion. It knows only to produce an illusion, nothing else. So the first thing that you should know is that you must relinquish the mind. You must get out of the mind completely, make the mind inactive. That means that you have to stop thinking. People begin to realize, how do you live without thinking? But you can, because people don't realize that there are various systems of assimilating knowledge in our bodies. There are actually four systems that we will describe in our discussions in the future. The first system is the mind that produces the illusion. When you relinquish the mind, when you get rid of everything that you have assimilated from the mind, including your memory as objects and uh, names given to those objects, then you move into the next level, which is called chitta. And when you get rid of chitta, you move into another level called prajna, and that's the one that sees Dhamma and Buddha. And when you get rid of prajna, you get to the final state of Buddha, and that is the highest level of intelligence. So the message of a Tathagata was how to become intelligent. Now it has become converted into practices and morals and worship, and has become a religion, unfortunately, and has not produced the results that we wanted. So now we will look at where we are. That is, we are at the moment interacting with an external environment, assume the internal environment as two different things, and interacting between the two, and obtain knowledge from outside, and conduct a life which we call day-to-day living, in that you have happiness and sorrow, and um, up and down, and good and bad, and all sorts of dualities that we encounter in a crude form. But when you get rid of the mind, It is called nekkamma in Buddhist terms, in Magadhi language. Nekkamma means relinquish, leave behind. If you leave behind or make the mind inactive, and then you move into the next stage. So everybody should know first where you are at this moment. Where you are is interacting with an external environment through the mind, through your senses, and using the memory. And the next stage, it's different. And when you get to the stage of prajna, there is no external and internal environment. Everything that you see are like tiny particles that arise and see, which is Dhamma. And you will see what Dhamma consists of, that it is knowledge, it's conglomeration of knowledge, aggregation of knowledge. And then beyond that is when there is no arising and ceasing, and that's pure knowledge, which is Nibbana. So every Buddhist, the ultimate goal is to attain Nibbana, and in fact, there is one more step to move further to intelligence. Uh, we must know where you start and where you will end up. You will end up with knowledge that brings in from within body, within your body, and that's in Buddhist term called Pacchattam Veditabbo. Pacchattam means within, from within. Veditabbo means that you must know the knowledge should come from within, not from outside, not through your five senses. So you have to make the five senses inactive for at least for a short while to get into the next stage. So that is where you are going. And why are you going? Third question. Because it is a fact that from birth every one of us want to know the truth, want to know what's happening, what is actually happening. You, we seem to be satisfied because of our religions, because we are restricted to mind, the things that are found outside. As we get to know certain things from outside that help us to live, carry on with our life, then we think we know, and we think we know the truth, but actually it's not. The truth is hidden by the mind, and the truth can be seen, and that is why we want to know the truth, because it's inherent within us that from birth we want to know the truth. And the truth, I said, is consists of, at this stage, we describe this as two states. One is Dhamma, and the next one beyond that is Buddha. And so the final thing you ought to know, I said, where you are now, where you want to go, why you are going, and the final thing you want to know, how to go, how to see Buddha. And that is what we are trying to discuss today. How to see the state of Buddha within you. And when you see, you become intelligent. You don't have to read books. You don't have to ask others. All the knowledge in this so-called universe is within here. And you can unearth them, and you become very intelligent, and then your life will become very happy and easy. Um, at the final stages, you will lose the concept of past and future. You become timeless, and everything that happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future, you will be able to see as if it happens at the time that you want to know. So that is something that everybody can achieve, but it is a case of making an effort to move in that direction to states in that, in the order that I mentioned. First is the mind, next is chitta, third is prajna, and fourth is buddha. So in these various stages you move up, finally you end up with full enlightenment. And enlightenment means you are enlightened with what? Enlightened with intelligence. And we call in our day-to-day term it's knowledge, but enlightenment intelligence is beyond knowledge as well. So let's see why we cannot unearth this. This eye of prajna is is completely covered by the activity of the mind and how the mind activity prevents it. And once you know that, then you can get rid of the mind, because you ought to know a little bit about how the mind works. And unfortunately, mind will not tell you how the mind works. It will only show what's outside. It will interact with outside, but it won't tell you exactly what's happening inside and how this system works. For that, you have to know or find somebody who has moved to the stage of prajna, at least who had seen Dhamma and Buddha, to tell, so that he has got that knowledge to tell the others that this is the way the mind works, and if you know this way, you can put a stop to that system, and then you will be able to move to the next level. So there are systems of acquiring knowledge in our body, and the system that we have at the moment is the lowest system that we can have. Once you get rid of this system, the system that arises is much at a much higher level. And then when you get rid of that, prajna is even at a higher level. And they see differently. They don't see rupa or images. In the level of prajna, you don't see rupa. You see the actual way the so-called universe is. And you can obtain all that knowledge without reading any books or listening to anybody else. So let's see how the mind works. The mind first, an image must fall on a sense organ, and then it must pass through. If it's the eye, it must pass through the retina to the brain, and then the brain projects it to the mind. And people don't realize that there is a separate thing called mind. Even modern science has not found a separate thing called mind, but there it is, because the speed of the mind is faster than the speed of light. So the equipment that's made by the five senses and the memory and the mind or the brain um, cannot reach that level. So science will never find the mind. But whereas the body, science has found, and because it is at a much lower level than the speed of light, so our five senses can perceive the body, and we differentiate various parts of the body as sense organs, the brain, the arms and the legs, and so on. So the mind and the body are live together, always together. But they body needs the mind needs the body to make it a success, to achieve some information, to go through from outside to inside, and to perceive and understand what's happening out in the outside world, not inside, not within. So in this system, the mind first wakes up. When the image falls through sense organ, it passes through, if it is the eye, through the retina, then through the nerves to the brain, and the brain projects it to the mind, which is found all over the body. It's not the brain, it's found all over the body. Although you can't see or touch, you know something is behind, and it wakes up. So when you get up in the morning, you hear the alarm, or you see the light, or hear some noise, and you wake up. That's waking up, becoming alert, and that's called vijnana. In Buddhist terms, it's called vijnana. The mind wakes up. Mind is now active. When the mind wakes up, that image falls on the mind. Then, because the mind has no memory, remember, all religions assume that the mind has memory. We know that in medical terms, the mind has no memory, because if you uh, have an accident and have damaged part of the brain which contains certain memory, and if that part of the brain is removed or by surgery, you lose that memory. You can't get that memory back. It's stored in the brain. So basically, all religions fall apart when you actually know that the memory is not in the mind. The memory is in the brain. So mind has to send a message to the brain where the memory is stored and ask what it is. So it tells you this is a tree, or this is a chair, or this is another person, because in the memory you have deposited in a specific way, and it's in Buddha message. It's called Nama Rupa. A name, Nama is a name, Rupa is an image. So every image you give a name, and you link the name and the image by being knowledgeable, which means the Rupa and Nama, the image and the name, is linked by a person called me. If you take a balance, the two baskets, one contains Nama and the other one Rupa, and the rod that contains or holds the two baskets is the me. And that is where it becomes your knowledge. Somebody else tells you this is a chair, and then you put it in your memory and consider it yours after that. And that is mine, that is my knowledge. And that is where me arises, and me where me is stored. So me is not found anywhere else in the body but in the memory. So if you bring something from the past, remember here, for you to identify an object, to interact with the environment, you have to go to the past all the time. Otherwise, because it's a past experience that's been stored in your memory. So it creates what you call time, past and future, and that is how the time arises in your mind. And even Einstein said time is a function of mind. It's not a function of outside. And people, I mean these particularly modern scientists, physicists are trying to find time outside. You will not find time. Time is a function of your memory and the mind. So now the memory, you pick up the actual image that corresponds to what has fallen on the mind, and then it relates back to the mind and say that this is a chair. So it it brings the whole balance. That means whole Nama and Rupa, the name and the image, along with me. The whole, all three comes back to the mind. So what ends up as a thought, I saw a chair, there's always I or me in that, and whether what was seen or what was heard there, in this instance is a chair, and whether you saw it or touched it or heard it, that's the third parameter. So all these three parameters come together and found in every thought you have. And every thought, therefore, is mine. Every thought has a person called me in it. So what happens if what I say today is you understand through your mind? What happens? It is you who are understanding this. So it becomes your knowledge, and it becomes an obliteration or an or obstacle to open the eye of Prajna. So the mere fact that knowledge is obtained through that system completely covers the things that we want to unearth from our body. So there's a special way of listening to these Dhamma talks, and which I will explain on another day, on another occasion, uh, if we have time today, a bit later. And so this system continues every day. It goes on for years and years. Ultimately, when the so-called person dies, and the system stops. So there was no person called me to begin with. There were only objects. that is perceived by the mind. And then you continue to bring in these objects and assimilate them and acquire them as yours, your knowledge. And then from that moment, you have a person called me existing in this system. And with that, you have external and internal division. External to the sense organs is outside, internal to the sense organ is inside, and inside is me or mind. That is me, because it is the system that perceives all the information from outside that is considered and stored in the mind and in the memory, uh, that gives you that impression that there is a person called me. So there is no person called me in the image that falls, or the when it falls on the retina, or when it's conducted to the brain through nerves, and when it is projected to the mind, there is no person called me. But after the mind asks from the memory what it is, then the result is a thought, which invariably always includes me in it. So every thought, take it as simplest thought, you have three components of a thought, which is the actual object you saw or touched or heard, and then whether you saw it or heard it, and then it's me. So this is the basis of religion, and religion assumes that there is a person called me, whereas seeing Buddha or a message of a Buddha message, there is no person called me. Actually, it's an illusion created by the mind. So you see that the religion goes in one direction, and the seeing Buddha goes only in the other direction. So now, as also said earlier, that this body and the mind always works together. And we actually, the mind perceives only the body and the objects from outside. We think or assume there's another system that is inside, which is called the mind, although we can't see or touch. But there is something that's active. And these two spaces, which acts within the same space but acts differently, uh, you have what we call body and the mind. And this body and the mind is always together through an attraction, which in Buddhist terms called tanha. Tanha means there are three things, the body, the mind, and the tanha, that links together to form three spaces within the body. This is called three loka. Loka is called space in Buddhist terms. So we have in the body three spaces which interact together to produce thoughts. First is the body, which consists of, we have now from outside, we have a head, eyes, nose, the mouth, and the arms and legs. But when you go down, dividing and subdividing, at the end, you will have just tiny particles arising and ceasing, and whether it is in the nose or the eye or the leg, they are exactly the same. Just like electrons are protons, electrons and protons, wherever they are exactly the same. So as they conglomerate, aggregate together, the character changes, and then one you might see as a nose, another one you might see as a mouth, or ear, or the body, or the head, and so you perceive it differently depending on the conglomeration or aggregation. Whereas the mind is also found in this space, and it is also made of these tiny particles that arise and cease. However, they don't conglomerate, they don't aggregate, and they are as separate all the time, and their speed is much faster than the light, so you can't actually, your senses can't pick it up, whether it's present or not. But you know from activity that you have a feeling that there's something behind that keeps working within our minds. So as long as these three units are together, there are three units in the same space, but access and functionally there are three different spaces. Just like in our environment, you have oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. They all work indifferently. They all react differently in their own way. Just like that, inside our space called this body, There's a physical body, the mind, and tanha, that is the aggregation or the attraction of between the body and the mind that does not have any particles arising or ceasing. It's like two magnets together, the space in between the attraction. And as long as these three are together, the impulses that come from outside through our senses passes through to the mind because there's a bridge between the body and the mind. And then the mind sends in information back to the memory and then identifies it, and then it forms a thought. And this thought completely covers the eye of prajna because it nourishes tanha. So the food for tanha, or the strength to make this attraction more powerful, comes from the thought. So it self perpetuates. Every time a thought comes, it becomes nourishment to tanha, and then the body and the mind are bound together more firmly for the next one to come in. And this is what we call, in Buddhist terms, sansara or sayamsaro, which means by itself it nourishes. And this goes on, and at night we stop temporarily the working of the mind and go to sleep and then wake up in the morning, and the activity continues. It goes on and on. And this goes in a cycle. One impulse comes, goes through to the mind, identifies, forms a thought, and it becomes nourishment to tanha, it binds together, the next one comes. So this goes on cycles, round and round and round, and this is what we describe as paticca samuppada, or the cause of the cycle of cause and effect. And that's the one that perpetuates the activity of the mind, and that's the one that prevents the eye of prajna emerging. So what we have to do is to break this cycle, and we break this cycle by stopping the thought. And if you stop the thought, then you can break the cycle at least momentarily for a moment, and then tanha becomes weak because it doesn't get that nourishment, what we call a thought. When it is weak, there is the opportunity to separate the body and the mind. And when the body and the mind separates off, and then the eye of prajna opens up and sees Dhamma and Buddha. So seeing Buddha happens at that time. So for that to happen, you need to separate the body and the mind, and that's the link between the two. You normally provide nourishment in terms of thoughts, and you stop thinking. With no nourishment, it becomes weak, and then there's an opportunity arises. There will be an opportunity to separate the body and the mind. So this is the message of a Buddha. How to see Buddha is first to understand what your body is, what your physical body is, what your mind is, and how the body and the mind are linked together, and what is the activity of the mind, how an impulse goes through to the mind, form a thought, and how the tanha becomes strengthened after the thought. And unfortunately, mind doesn't tell you how that system works, so you'll have to be found out by somebody who has opened the eye of prajna. And it is very difficult if nobody, as what happened after 2100 years ago, after about 450 years after the death of Buddha or Tathagata, uh, that system completely disappeared. That knowledge of how to open the eye of prajna disappeared. Now that's opened up, so it's up to you to try and do it yourself. You become intelligent, and it's how long does it take? Just this moment. Next moment you can see. It is so quick. It's so spontaneous. The mind and the body separates, the eye of prajna opens, and you have vast amount of knowledge in front of you that has come through the eye of prajna. And then beyond that is the intelligence, what we call buddhi as well. So, so today's discussion was based on mostly for those who have forgotten, or mostly who have um, starting to look at this new approach to seeing Buddha, where you are, where you are going, why you are going, and how you go. At the end, you want to know only how you go. But if you try to understand what you see through the eye of prajna, through your mind, it becomes an obstacle. Because what the mind perceives cannot understand what the prajna will see. You will always have questions. Even now, when you say everything arises and ceases, you will have question, how can that be? If it arises and ceases, how can something be stored? Because everything disappears and a new thing opens up. But remember, in your mind, what you store is only an image, it's an illusion. It's not what is actual knowledge. So you have religions with various activities that you do, worship and practices and moral practices, and they have nothing to do with you becoming intelligent or opening the eye of prajna. And now uh, I will tell briefly how to get to this stage within the next few minutes, just an introduction. In your part, first you have an experiment within yourself, and in that experiment, you understand the body, mind, and how they interact, the tanha, and how image falls, and all that I have described very, very briefly today. And after that, you need to understand this mind is the obstacle, mind is a problem, mind is always obstructs you get into that stage you want to, or becoming intelligent, or knowing the truth. Therefore, you want to get rid of the mind. So now you want to get rid of the mind. You have understood how a thought is formed, and if you stop the thought, unfortunately, you are put to sleep. So you can't do anything. So we have to have a trick to get to that stage without the mind knowing literally. And what you do is you take the thought and separate the components of the thought and be awake using one part of the thought. Now you have three parts. If you take, for example, you saw a chair, I saw a chair. In that, you take away I and the chair and learn to be awake through saw or seeing. And that is not difficult. It can be done very quickly. And that is either seeing or hearing or whatever the process. But it is easiest to do with seeing, and you will know that in the Buddhist literature there's a sutra called sutra or a trick called Bahia. A person called Bahia was told how to do this, and if you keep only the seeing within that system working, active, and then get rid of the I part and the image you saw, whether it's a tree or a chair or whatever. So at the end, you have only seeing. That means you see, but you see nothing. The easiest way to do this is you look at some object very far, about at least 100 meters away. There are various trees you can see, and if they are not moving, so much the better. And a tree that you cannot identify at such a distance that you cannot actually recognize what it is exactly, what kind of tree. So you look at the tree, when you look at the tree, you get the first thought, I saw a tree, you can't stop that. So then we're trying to now stop the next one. And what you do is you look at the tree and stay blank without investigating it. Normally, when we look at an object, we tend to investigate without our knowledge. It's because you've learned to do it over and over again. You try to find out what tree and whether there are fruits and all that, flowers and all that, very quickly. So here you just look at the tree and you saw it, yes, okay, and then after that you don't investigate anything. You stay blank while looking at the tree for about 10 seconds, not very long, and then you look at the space between the tree and you. So empty space. So you basically get rid of that Rupa image, and I also gets dropped along with it. So the notion of me and the Rupa, the image, falls away, and you are left with only seeing. You are seeing, but not seeing anything. So basically, looking at a blank space. So if you can stay like that for about 10 minutes without getting disturbed, without going back to the tree, just stay like that, then you're a very successful person. When you train for 3 or 4 times doing that, we only ask you to do about 10 minutes a day during daylight. Uh, you can train um, more often if you have time, but in a busy our day-to-day life, we can find 10 minutes, preferably in the morning when everything is quiet. Because sometimes if the place is noisy, when you look at the space, you hear sounds. And if you do hear, just it is only a sound. Don't try to find out what it is. Just it's only a sound. It's just hearing only. You don't know what you hear. You don't differentiate it, whether it's a bus that went past by or a bird uh, singing. You just ignore that. Just it's only a sound. The problem most people have is things come from the memory, which is inside your body, which is the sixth organ. In religions, the mind is the sixth organ. Actually, it's not an organ. Uh, it's not an organ that can store or send impulses through to the mind. It is a memory. And this memory sends you past events from time to time when your mind is relatively inactive. And that you have to train for yourself not to go back to the past. And if you can overcome that, you will be able to stay at least a couple of minutes without having a thought. And it is a very peculiar situation, and you will not know this during this activity. You will only know after you finished your exercise that that you didn't feel there was a person called me, and that you didn't feel the time passing. You was only being awake, the consciousness. And then you will come to know later on that you have, uh, during that time, relinquished the mind. You moved away from the mind. Mind became inactive. In fact, it was not to be seen. And you were awake through a different system, next level up, which is called Chitta. In that system, you don't feel there's a person called me, or you don't feel time passing when there are no thoughts like that. So if you can train yourself like that, you can get away from thoughts, and anytime after that, you don't, once you're trained, you don't have to look at trees. After that, you can look at the space to start with. You can start from that point. You can drop the first bit of looking at a tree. And once you do, and if you can manage to do 2, 3 minutes um, without getting any thoughts, then after that, what you should do is to sit somewhere, quiet place, sit comfortably, close your eyes. When you close your eyes, you look towards the knees, because if you when you close your eyes, the eyes rotate upwards. They get rolled upwards naturally, normally, and the light comes through uh, your pupils through the eye lids, and in red and yellow colors, and you get disturbed. So to prevent that, you rotate the eye downwards. That means look at towards the knee, and then when you close the eyes, you will see darkness. That is also part of seeing. So if you have trained properly, the way I said before, you will be able to pass time without investigating the darkness, without perceiving the darkness. After a few attempts, you will not realize at that time again. It's only after that you will not see darkness. And then at that time, you have got rid of all three components of that thought. Now we can call it Cheto Vimukti. That means completely, totally, all the components of the thought have been extinguished or have been destroyed for that moment. And if you can stay like that for a couple of minutes, 2, 3 minutes, you're well trained to go to the next stage. And this is what we call the experiment first, using the mind, trying to get into a different state, and then finally get rid of the mind without it knowing that we got rid of it. So you'll find if you can train this to start with, this is the first stage. There are a few other stages to go through. Then you have to listen to the truth afterwards, and we'll discuss that in the next discussion next Friday. Um, if you can train like that, you will feel very relaxed in your life. And if you've done it properly, when you're resting, you say afterwards, you come and sit down somewhere, have a cup of tea, and you rest a while, you will find automatically, without you making an effort, have entered into periods where for a few minutes you haven't had any thoughts. You don't realize it at the time. You only, when you come out, only you realize, oh, the time has passed. I didn't have any thoughts at the time. And that's very well trained for the next stage. And that's the stage where we all want to get to. That means you want to relinquish the mind anytime you want, you can get into the mind and you can stop the mind's activity. It doesn't take long to do this. It takes about 3 attempts with the looking at the tree and a few more attempts looking at the space, and then finally closing your eyes and not investigating the darkness. Uh, for the moment, I think for today's talk, we will stop at that and we'll spend about a little over an hour. And if there are any questions, I'll take now. Uh, Over to you, Tilak.
Thank you, Doctor. That's a very interesting subject that you spoke about. I don't see any questions from the audience at the moment, but I have one. Well, basically, while listening to you, the practice that you mentioned at the end of looking at the tree and also closing your eyes, isn't that like a kind of a meditation itself?
Now, it is not meditation. I didn't go into details of meditation. Meditation is where you develop or control the activity of the mind. So you're always awake through the mind, that's vijnana. And now, when you do this exercise I mentioned, when you get rid of the darkness and you're still awake, it is not the mind that's awake. I say this chitta. The wakefulness of the mind was called vijnana, and this is the exact opposite. It's called jnana. That is the wakefulness of chitta is called jnana. And opposite, the wrong side of it is called vijnana. So in meditation that we do in various two types of meditation, samatha and vipassana, both your mind is active, and therefore if they do not uh, lead to nibbana, and not heard that anybody after doing meditation has attained nibbana. No, they will not attain because it's still the mind that is active and is not gone beyond the mind. You will not relinquish the mind. Actually, you are well entrenched in the activity of the mind by meditating, and if you attain various levels of absorptions called dhyana, you are well entrenched in that, so you will not be able to get out of it. So it is not a meditation. It is completely opposite to the meditation. We are getting rid of activity of the mind here. Although it sounds like a form of meditation, it is not. It is not meditation. Any other questions?
No, Doctor. I think that's the only question I had. I have a different question, but I think I'll push it on to next week. So Dr. Gamini will also be joining us next Friday at the same time, and Dr. Gamini will be speaking on furthering the same topic and discussing deeper on how to see how to see Buddha and the different levels he just mentioned. The body, the the mind and how it creates the brain and the mind, and the brain that creates the mind, and how we should control the mind. I think that's the most critical part, like, and stop creating thoughts and emotions from there. So I think Doctor will take us deeper next week, Doctor. I think that is that the subject matter that we're going to discuss next
Yes,
Friday.
yeah,
Yeah,
we'll discuss the practical side of it.
yeah, the
Uh,
practical side of what we have been
but
speaking
the
all this
important thing is for to move on to the practical side, you need to understand the mind's activity. You need to understand all the information that you have acquired through your mind, particularly regarding religion, has to be dropped. If you still have all those, if you conduct all those practices, moral practices, what are these beliefs, behaviors, and all that, um, they are all activities of the mind, activities of a person called me, so that will obstruct you getting to your final aim. So you need to try and completely forget about, and they don't. They are actually obstructions to to our path. To move along the path, you need to completely get away from that.
So we encourage our listeners to actually practice, maybe as Doctor says, for 5 to 10 minutes a day, and see whether this works for you and this helps you to basically be
It will help
able.
in day-to-day life as well, because you
Yeah,
become very relaxed and you will be able to think clearly. When you think using the mind, you think clearly without any other obstructions, because normally in your day-to-day life only 5% of the thoughts or even less are really necessary for your work day-to-day life.
yeah,
Lots of thoughts are totally unnecessary, and
totally
all these
unnecessary. That's
necessary
right. Yeah,
thoughts will disappear, and you will have only the thoughts that are needed to run your day-to-day life. Then you become more efficient.
right. So we look forward to seeing Dr. Gamni again next Friday at 8:30 p.m. Malaysian time. Please do inform your friends and family to join us at 8:30. As I mentioned, we also have in-person Dhamma talks going on, but we will also try to help those who are not at Buddhist Mahavihara or in the Klang Valley to also still get a chance to listen to online talks. So we will still carry on with the online talks. And with that, we've come to the end of this evening's Dhamma sharing. Let me thank Dr. Gamini Abhaya for taking time off from his busy schedule in the UK. Now with the Jubilee celebrations with the Queen, I think I don't know whether it's a holiday there in the UK, and also it's a summer, so it must be quite interesting. As you mentioned, people are out there in the parks and playing cricket and all that. And so we also like to thank our sponsors for this evening's Dhamma sharing, and also on behalf of the Committee of Management and the monks of the Buddhist Mahavihara, to all the listeners who join us here online. Please inform me, as I mentioned, to your friends and families. We are back online again once a week at least here at the Dhammadana series on the Facebook page live of Buddhist Mahavihara. So with that, good night and have a pleasant evening. Sakiotu.
Thank you.